Hello, this is Milagro Castilleja, producer and editor of the AskBYS Podcast, with an editor's note. This month's podcast encountered technical difficulties during production, so the audio quality of this podcast may seem quieter than usual. Thank you for your understanding, and please enjoy this episode.
Welcome to AskBYS Podcast, a monthly podcast brought to you by Bainbridge Youth Services. AskBYS Podcast connects parents to professionals that can provide support, education, and resources on a particular topic in parenting. My name is Shannon Ameling, and I am your host. I am here with Milagro Castilleja as our producer. We are recording live at the Media Arts Studio at BARN, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network.
Hello. Today we are happy to welcome our parent guest, Joe Dietz, a Bainbridge Island resident and father.
Hello. Hi, Shannon. Good to be here.
Good to have you. And our professional guest, Kelsey Lynch, Community Health Navigator and Victim Advocate for the Bainbridge Island Police Department.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having me here today.
Glad to have you here, too. Today's episode is connecting parents with a sexual assault resource advocate on the topic of sexual assault. And we invite you to listen in on this conversation between Joe and Kelsey.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Hi, Kelsey. It's good to see you. Good to meet you.
You as well.
Well, I'm a parent of a Bainbridge Island teenager, and so I've talked with her and her friends, and just some things that I'd like to chat with you about and
Sure.
get your perspective on
Absolutely.
this issue of sexual assault, which I'll just say, as a parent, that is probably one of the most difficult conversations we can have with our teenager. So, first thing, maybe start off broadly, Kelsey, is what is the most important things that you can tell us parents regarding the issue of sexual assault?
That's a big question, Joe. So, one of the first things that I often talk with parents about as they are asking questions, as they're curious about how to, navigate this type of issue, is to really acknowledge that, yes, this is an issue that we are seeing on Bainbridge Island, but this is also an issue that we are seeing at the same capacity throughout Kitsap County, throughout the greater Seattle area, and throughout the country. I think there's often a perception, because we are a small, close-knit community, that this issue is more pervasive here on Bainbridge Island than it might be in other areas. And in my work with the school district and my work with the police department, I'm very confident in saying that what we are seeing here on Bainbridge Island is no more prominent than what we are seeing, kind of countrywide. And I think that, there's some positives and negatives with that information. Obviously, we wish that this was less pervasive everywhere, but I think that there's often, some comfort to parents in knowing that this isn't an issue that we are only seeing here on Bainbridge, or that we are having, kind of this epidemic of sexual assault here that we aren't seeing in other areas. So I always, kind of talk with parents about, the statistics and some of the perceptions that we have in a smaller community about this issue, because that's a fear that they come to me with, is that this is happening more pervasively in our community than in other communities. So that's kind of, a place that I often start the conversation. Some of the other things that I think are really important for parents to know is that if this is something that they are concerned that their child has experienced, that there are resources for them. This is not something that they need to navigate alone. It is not something that they need to, kind of hold close-knit or feel like they can't discuss possibilities around how to support their kid or how to, navigate the systems without support. My role as the Community Health Navigator and Victim Advocate for the PD is a newer position. It's something that the city and the police department felt was important to bring on back in January of 2021. And I think it really has changed some of the ways that we work within this community. So it is not uncommon that parents will reach out to me directly to kind of run hypothetical situations and say, if this were to happen to my child, or if my child described the situation, what would be the next steps? How would I go about, supporting them through this, supporting them through the criminal justice process? They can absolutely reach out and ask those types of questions without initiating anything through law enforcement. And it's somewhat common that parents do that with my role, is that they will ask kind of hypothetical, how do I navigate some of these complex systems before something actually happens, or before their youth is ready to kind of start that process. So there's supports through the police department, through my role. There's also supports through the county. We have agencies in Kitsap that their sole purpose is to support and advocate for individuals going through this process. So if somebody is not comfortable, coming to the police department, which I know is a hard thing to do for a lot of people, there's, perceptions of what that looks like. There are other agencies that are available to help educate both youth and parents about this issue and how to walk with your youth as they go through this process. So I think those are, really where I start the conversation with parents around this issue.
I see you're not wearing a uniform or anything, so
No.
so you're kind of an employee of the police department, but you're not a uniformed officer.
Absolutely. And we were very particular about that with my role. There are social workers embedded in police departments all across the country now. It's a very common direction that law enforcement is taking, and some of them do wear uniforms. This community and this department, we felt very strongly that we wanted my role to be very approachable, to be very separate from the role of a uniformed officer, because I'm in the schools a lot, I'm in the community a lot, I'm very much involved with a lot of different community events, and having a much more perceived approachability was really important as we kind of constructed my role.
Great. I have seen you around, so.
I've seen you as well.
Yeah. So like you said, relating to Bainbridge Island, because this is where we live, and this is, we talk to in my case, a teenager, and hear about things going on. There's a perception, at least, maybe among families, that there's something unique about Bainbridge relating to this, but you're saying really that's not the case. That yes, we are having this issue, and this is not new, but we're hardly unique in as far as the region, the state,
Yes.
nationally, and globally for that matter. So whether that's good or bad is another thing, but it helps put perspective that this is a problem that we share with other communities.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I was thinking, kind of going through a scenario that maybe you could help me and those listening, your advice, because this is something I can readily see happening. So, a young person comes to a parent, and the dinner table or what have you, when these conversations could occur, and they describe a situation involving a sexual assault. And mind you, this could be to them, it could be to a friend of theirs,
Sure.
or any number of scenarios. But the sexual assault is the situation, and the parent will say, well, we should do something about that. And yet the young person they're resistant to contacting the police or the school district. And maybe they say, oh, the police and the school district, they just kind of, they're not interested in this issue, or they're complicit with the perpetrator. They maybe say something along those lines. Here's my question to frame, is how could us parents respond to that kind of concern? and help to establish the faith in the young person that they, as parents, we're here to help them, and that those institutions, police, school district, etc., are there to help them recover and gain control.
So I'm going to come at this from a couple different angles. There's
Sure.
a couple questions in there. But one of the first things that I want to, just kind of acknowledge, you said that this could be a situation about them or a friend or, a kind of variety of possibilities. And we actually see that a lot. Teenagers are more likely to disclose issues around sexual assault, domestic violence within their relationships, or suicidality or self-harming to a friend before they are likely to disclose it to a safe, trusted adult. And so we see that scenario play out quite often, that teenagers are coming to their parents or coming to their safe, trusted adult about a situation around a friend, because they're often more comfortable disclosing that to another juvenile or another youth, often through a social media platform, whether that's Snapchat or texting or any of the wide variety that teenagers use these days. So I think that that's an important piece to acknowledge, is that parents aren't necessarily always responding to these situations for their own child. They're trying to navigate how to support somebody else's youth and respect privacy and respect their youth's privacy. So it's complex, it's complicated. In terms of, kind of my recommended response when kids disclose and say that they aren't ready for, maybe a police report or talking with the school about what the school can provide in terms of safety and support, is that part of one of the challenges around sexual assault is that we know it's about power and control. There's plenty of research that supports that fact, and what we really want to be able to do is empower that individual to control as much as they possibly can moving forward. And so I think the most important thing that a parent can do, especially initially, is be there to listen.
Right.
And take cues from their youth. This is one of those things where, every parent, I think, wants to step in immediately and think of, how can I solve this problem? How can I take away this pain? How can I take away this struggle? How can I fix this situation? And oftentimes, our definition of fixing as adults looks very different than what a juvenile is expecting or wanting. And so, as hard as it is to kind of put your own emotional reaction aside, I think that we really encourage that, especially in that initial disclosure, because that can, be a very hard conversation for a youth to have. So I strongly encourage, parents, as a youth is bringing them this type of concern or struggle, to try really hard to take a step back and hear what the youth is asking for. And sometimes that is not an initial, let's go to the police, let's go, to the school. And we want to respect that as best as we can. And I say as best as we can for a couple of reasons, because sometimes there's some safety concerns that it is the adult's job to respond to, in order to preserve the safety of their child, and in order to preserve the safety of other, youth in the community. But if it's possible, we want to take as many cues from the victim and survivor of the sexual assault in terms of how do we move forward. If the youth is ready to make those steps, if they are, expressing a desire to make a police report, if they're expressing a desire to work with schools on, mitigating some either safety concerns or comfort concerns, or, looking for supports in those different entities, I think it's important for parents to really try to walk with their youth through that process. Parents are absolutely kept part of the criminal justice process. Part of my role is really as, kind of a extra layer of communication between the department and the family and the victim. But they're not excluded from a lot of that process. We know that teens need their parents' support as they move through that system. And that's the same with the school. I go to many, many school meetings between youth and parents and the school administration to talk about how do we set things in motion in order for youth to feel comfortable going to their classes, feel comfortable accessing the supports within the school that they need, and how do we create kind of this wraparound service approach to walk with these kids through this process. I think one of the challenges from my side of things when we're talking about youth having the perception or feeling like maybe there's disinterest in this topic or that there's a lack of support, is that so much of this is done confidentially. Obviously we would never want to put it back on the victim of a crime to be the one to publicly advocate their story or publicly advocate for, the police department or the schools. We want them to feel like they have that ability to process this in their own way. And most people would choose to process that independent of public knowledge. So, I think a lot of times what we hear is the side where people feel like the system didn't work for them, but we don't advocate for individuals where they feel like the system did work for them to be our spokespeople. So I think, we want to respect the privacy of anybody going through the criminal justice system process or the school process. And a lot of that happens behind closed doors in a way that we can't tell the community these are the things that we are doing to support people through this.
Okay. Wow, thank you. This is very helpful. So it seems for a parent, of course, everything, it depends on the situation. And,
Sure.
and let's just say safety is paramount first. But first thing to do for a parent is to listen.
Absolutely.
And not sort of take charge like we like to think, well, certainly as dads like to do. And so that's a difficult thing, is to listen to your child. And where if it's a situation where there's a sense of either it's your child or someone they know, and there's a safety issue, then there is some, I would say, urgency. You want to do the right thing, so you're listening to your child. Meanwhile, this is a teenager who has their own frame of reference of how they may want to do it.
Sure.
But I'm just wondering, and if it seems serious enough, could the parent and the child just call you? I mean, as far as in a typical scenario, could Kelsey Lynch be the first point of contact?
I am often the first point of contact. And there's a couple reasons for that. I think that, one, I'm, again, not in a uniform. I'm clearly not a law enforcement officer. And they often know me. I'm in the school constantly, doing presentations, doing, kind of educational presentations to wide populations within the school and then small groups. And so it's not uncommon that individuals come to me first because they've had an interaction with me in a different capacity. And so absolutely, I will get phone calls kind of all the time from the school, from parents, from Bainbridge Youth Services, from counselors there to say, hey, this is what I'm hearing. Can you come in and kind of talk with my youth or this student or my client about hypothetically what would this process look like moving forward? And we do it hypothetically because part of my role is I am a mandated reporter. And so I always disclose that to people beforehand that, if something is disclosed that I'm legally required to report, I don't have a choice. We have to start that process. And so, we talk in hypotheticals about like, if this happened, what are your next steps? How do we navigate the system? What is my role in that? What is the law enforcement role? What is the juvenile justice system's role? How do we take, kind of snapshots of all of these different agencies and put it together in this picture that helps them understand where we're going to move from here if we start this process. I think youth have a strong misconception of what that looks like based on what we've seen on TV. Granted, I've seen every episode of Law & Order SVU. Love that show. It is not reflective of my job or law enforcement's job whatsoever. And so they have a lot of questions about, what does this look like in real life versus what do I, kind of hope that it looks like based on TV shows or based on, different things that they've seen through social media or online. And so I'm able to really work them through those kind of processes. And then I feel it makes it easier for them to then have that conversation with a law enforcement officer, because I cannot take that report. They do eventually, if they want to go through the criminal justice process, have to speak with a law enforcement officer. But it's something that we can talk about. Like, I'll be there for that. I will walk with you.
That's really good to know that you would be that contact person throughout the process.
Yeah. And I do work, incredibly close with our detective department. They're fantastic communicators as they start going through the investigatory process. But law enforcement language, criminal justice language, is not how we speak in everyday conversations. So oftentimes, I'm somewhat of the translator to youth about hey, this is what, the prosecutor said or what the detective said. This is what that means in, kind of layman's terms about where we're at in this process.
And I think it's interesting that you first talk in terms of hypotheticals with the individual, so that nothing is like, oh, now we have to file a report.
Absolutely.
Because reports aren't filed on hypotheticals.
No. And we're trying to give them as much control in that as possible. We want them to be able to ask their questions and have as much information going into this situation as possible in order for them to feel like, they have the ability to advocate for themselves and advocate for what is going to feel the most supportive for them. And so I think, having those conversations in that hypothetical allows them to, at the end, where they have as much information as they are looking for, make an informed decision about where do they want to go from here. Because not everybody in this situation does want to go through the criminal justice process. Healing and moving through the trauma of different situations looks very different for everybody. Justice looks very different for everybody. And not everybody is looking to go through the same systems as everybody else.
So in the hypothetical, like you said, there's a wide variety. So in the situation where the person says, well, I'm not doing anything, well, that's your decision.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that has to be their decision for forever. Mm-hmm. Just because they, kind of decline to go through one avenue of support or different services at the time doesn't mean that they can't come back at a later time and say, I've worked through parts of this and now I've decided that I want to go, through this other piece. Mm-hmm. So even if after the hypotheticals they're like, thank you, but no thank you, that doesn't mean that they can't call me in 2 months and say, nope, I've changed my mind. I'm ready to go through this. How can you support me through this?
That's very good. So it's having a relationship with you, and they decide not to do anything at that time, that they can their minds, come back and say, I have a change of, I've changed my mind
Sure.
on this issue. Well, this is really helpful. Some of sort of you describing the process of how the parent can support the child, listening, being there for them throughout this process, working with you, understanding what the options are. So a number of things that the parent can do. What would you say, sort of the contrary to that, what are the things, I hate to say this, parent, what are the things that we should not do when it comes to the issue of sexual assault?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think the first thing that always comes to mind for me is push your child to disclose everything immediately. The way that individuals process difficult situations looks different across the board. It will look different between different children in the same home. It'll look different between, when they're 14 versus when they're 18. The way that we internally process challenges and trauma is an ever-evolving thing. And what we know about victims of sexual assault is that they don't process that information in a linear fashion. And so, what they initially disclose might not be the whole story. And as a parent, you often pick up on that there are details that are missing, that there are, you will have so many questions about, well, what about this and that and this? But it's sometimes perceived as if your youth is withholding information or maybe being deceptive about information. But the reality might actually be is that they don't know the answer to those questions. And so when they're asked kind of repetitively to fill in some of those blanks, that can be really overwhelming for their system. So we really want to try to create an environment where they can disclose pieces at their own pace and when they're ready and comfortable. That's a hard conversation for a juvenile to have with a parent. It's a hard conversation for a parent to hear from their juvenile, but imagine talking to your parent about a sexual situation in general is uncomfortable for many students, many parents. And then you throw in, a traumatic component to that. And that's a really hard thing that we're asking kids to entrust in their parents. And so asking them to disclose kind of everything all in one fell swoop is probably unrealistic because that's just not how that process works. The other thing that I would say is that parents can't really force their kids to go down a criminal justice route if the kid doesn't want to. We need their buy-in to the process. We need them to actively engage in the investigation and the disclosure. So if the youth is not ready to file a police report, it is probably not in their best interest to be kind of forced into that situation.
Yeah, got it. Offhand, can you say, on a percentage basis, what would be the number of times the youth would say, I do not want to move forward, as opposed to they do?
I mean, off the top of my head, I can't give you statistics from our department for that. I did not look into that before this conversation to have actual
numbers. Sorry, that sort of sprung that on you.
But I would say that it's not uncommon. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. This is an incredibly personal experience. It's an incredibly intimate experience in a lot of ways, from a traumatic place. And I am a complete stranger. That detective is a complete stranger. The person doing the child forensic interview is a complete stranger. That is incredibly difficult to ask a youth, let alone an adult, to disclose one of the most kind of intimate and challenging situations to complete strangers. And so it's it's not uncommon that adults and juveniles don't want to go through that process, that sounds incredibly traumatic, and aren't emotionally ready for that. So we definitely do get reports of sexual assaults where juveniles and their families come to the decision that, like, hey, we're not going to go down this avenue right now. It's not in the best interest of our child.
Okay. Well, thank you. And yeah, so it's incredibly difficult for the parent to how to navigate this of first listening, supporting their child, and then honoring their child's wishes, if you will, in whatever direction they want to take. And I think maybe making sure no stone is unturned. You know, you're trying to be the adult here in the room. But then, like you said, it could be a case where the child's saying, I'm done, I'm walking away, so to speak. And the parent may feel differently, but I think the difficult thing would be to honor that, that it is the child's decision. It is their situation. So, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, I think looking at this as, us as adults and parents and thinking of the school district, police department, how can we empower our youth? At the end of the day, this is what we want to do on so many levels. And how can we empower our youth to access the supporting network that help them navigate these situations? How do we help them access those supports? So I think having your phone number would be a good start. So hopefully that will be part of at the end of the project. Here's Kelsey's phone number.
It is online, so.
Well, it might be good to go ahead and repeat here.
Sure.
But I see this as first off, this is great that you're doing this. I'm so glad the city is funding your position, and that it's certainly a step in the right direction, because, like I said, this is a relatively new position, and I can only imagine how it was done before. So this is an improvement, and how maybe the adults are finally sort of listening, so to speak, to the youth as to how to better help them navigate these issues. So what would you say is, again, how can we help the youth to access all the supporting network, and really, again, get them back to empowering them, giving them with that sense of control? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first initial thought goes to, obviously we want to be able to help youth access the supports and services that they need. But I also think that, there's a piece before that, in terms of how do we, kind of educate youth and parents in the community about the different roles of the agencies that are involved in this process, and how do we have some of these conversations maybe prior to the crisis. I think, oftentimes we are very reactive, and we only kind of think about these questions and process these questions after a crisis, after an incident. But, I would love if we were having these conversations with our youth, with our parents, far earlier than that crisis moment, because the way that we absorb information, the way that we process information, even as parents, as there's, kind of chaos in our family and our home because something traumatic is happening, is very different than how we process information when we are curious and asking questions in, kind of this state of quote unquote normalcy. And so, I think that we as a community have some really awesome resources to be able to have some of those conversations prior to. Bainbridge Youth Services has parent support groups that are going on, that these types of questions are coming up, and parents talking to other parents about, what does that look like in their family, about how are we having conversations around boundaries, around consent, around sexuality. it's really empowering for parents to work together with other parents to kind of navigate some of those more challenging conversations. But doing it from a proactive way is really, really cool for me as a community member, because I do live on Bainbridge Island, to watch. So I think, there's some expansion in, proactive parental support. And then there's also opportunities for parents to, meet with school officials, meet with law enforcement, and get an understanding of what their role actually is. The police department does a community police academy. That is a fantastic way to get to know our local law enforcement officers and to get an understanding of what is the capacity of our police department and what does that look like in terms of our role in this process. We also do, coffee with a cop. We actually have one of those coming up pretty soon, where, I think it would be really fantastic for parents to try to understand what is available for their youth prior to that crisis moment. Because I think then they will have a better capacity to explain to their child, like, what does this look like? How do we move through these systems in this moment of crisis if we have that knowledge beforehand? So part of it is, I would strongly encourage parents to take a proactive approach. Obviously, we really hope that the parent never needs to use that information. But if we can have some of those conversations outside of those crisis moments, that information usually tends to stick better and have, a little bit more of an impact when that crisis comes up if we've had some pre-experience. And then, I think once we're, kind of in those crisis moments, I think that we really want to, again, try to empower youth to take control where they can, and support them where they can't. And so the more that parents can have an understanding about what the different agencies have the capacity to do, I think that they have a better chance of, kind of helping support their kid to make the decisions that they need to make, in order to feel like they're the ones controlling that process.
Okay. Oh, wow, this is incredibly helpful. And you mentioned coffee with a cop and the police. I've heard about the police academy thing.
It's amazing. Yeah. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. This is very helpful to me, and I hope it is to listeners. And Kelsey, thank you so much.
Of course. I'm happy to answer questions and be involved as much as I can in the community, so thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Jill and Kelsey, for allowing us to be a part of your conversation today. What a great conversation with lots of information. Thank you all who have joined us. We hope that this conversation proves to be of benefit to you in your parenting. We leave you with the foundation that healthy youth begin with healthy families, and healthy families create healthy communities.
BYS is a nonprofit organization that is supported by community members like you. For more information, please visit AskBYS.org. We thank Milagro Castilleja for producing our show. Another big thanks to Barn, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network, for their generosity in allowing us to record in their media arts studio.